Good morning, everyone. The second event should begin in about 5 minutes. I'd like to announce that if there's anyone here who has a presentation and has any material that they'd like to display, please bring it forward so that we can generate it.
There's no issue. Oh, it's a change. Like, there's no issue. No, we haven't. The issue here is when we are rotating the camera.
Okay. Yeah. Oh.
So, you know, I'm thinking I should bring it down.
Yeah, I think that would be the best option. Take this in now. Yeah, I can stop. See right now. I thought Pauline needs to speak. It's all the panelists that she's speaking.
Are you the chair, the panel?
No, I'm not the chair. Bolu and Afolabi is the chair of the panel.
And they are not online.
They're on the line. I think.
Because it says here that the chair of the panel is Kenita Yonola Umegure.
No.
What I have on this.
The chair of the panel is Bolu Atife.
Am I confusing this session?
Yeah.
African identity of the culture.
No. Legacy of slave.
What?
Legacies of slave.
I think the one was supposed to be.
No, today. It's 29.
Just apologies.
Already thank
Maybe I'm collaborating to
you. Not a failure.
Hello, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Can you see me?
Unfortunately, we can't see you. I think you have your video turned off or something.
No, my video. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Can you see me now?
Very well, ma'am.
Yeah, please. I don't know who is in charge, but me and my colleague joined earlier and we were booted out. So she's trying to join back. I don't know if it's something from the other side. Yeah.
We have
Okay.
resolved it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel. I'll be handing over to my colleague very soon. Just to briefly introduce y'all, welcome to this session. We started the first part yesterday in session 6D, and we had a fruitful session. So today we are moving over to 8B, where we have three panelists, and we hope and we trust it's going to be a very fruitful discussion like yesterday. So I'll just briefly hand over to my colleague to just give a brief overview of why we thought about this topic, this theme. Thank you. Bolu?
So hi, everyone. My name is Bolu Akinro, and together with Mary, we've been thinking about the afterlives of slavery within Nigeria, right, within the region today known as Nigeria, because compared to the movement of people outside the country, right, compared to, say, the transatlantic slave trade and other slaveries, domestic slavery and its legacy in contemporary Nigerian society is still very much understudied. And this is what motivated Mary and I to propose this panel. We started yesterday with two wonderful presentations already, talking about the endurance of slavery or slavery-like relations in today, present-day Kogi State, right, among Yoruba-speaking minority groups. We talked about the Osu caste system in Igbo society.
Okay, maybe without wasting much time, I'm sure she will get back to us. So I think we should. Okay, yeah, you are back. Let me give you time to conclude what you were saying.
No, I'm sorry, my internet is really bad today because I'm not currently in Germany. But so we'll just hand over to the presenters because I don't want a repeat of that happening. So I think the first person I have on my list is Jacob Adeshino. They'll be talking about proverbs, songs, and folklores in slavery discourse in Yoruba land. And they'll be followed by Ugbede Joseph Ineke, talking about slavery, freedom, and exclusion in Iga land, to be concluded by Monsuru Muritala, talking about Muslim clerics and abolitionism in colonial Lagos. So Jacob, you have the floor.
Can I share? Yeah. Good morning, everybody.
My name is Jacob Olaoluwa Adeshina from the University of Ibadan. I'm a graduate student in the Department of History, University of Ibadan. I will be talking about proverb, songs, and folklores in slave discourse in Yoruba land. My paper is a working paper, and then this is another. I'm offering another perspective to the discussion and study of slavery, and also offering another, apart from perspective, it's a space for us to critically and logically debate about what are the other sources available to us in studying slavery. And I'll be looking at it from the perspective of proverbs, songs, and folklores. And then in the discussion of in proverbs, I will be looking at the Yoruba conceptualization, perception, and treatment of slaves. Yoruba perception, conceptualization, and treatment of slaves are product of different material conditions. And that can be deduced from the proverbs. For example, we have proverbs like Teruba Joba in Yonikuiko. Sorry, I may not be able to interpret this thing very well in English because it is better said in Yoruba language for us to understand. Teruba Joba in Yonikuiko. There are some proverbs that talk about how accommodative Yorubas are to slavery. For example, one important proverb is Tiaba Kairu Inu Eru Abaje. It's a subject of another material condition. Unlike Tieruba Joba in Yonikuko, showing cruelty, showing the fact that if you make a slave a king, he is going to retaliate for the treatment you have given to him. That's the perspective. And there's another perspective that says, Eruko Nimuni Bubaeru, to show the fact that the misbehavior and the character of a slave can make you to conclusively to attack other slaves. So I will be if you look at it from the perspective of abolition, you can see a proverb like Eguni Baba Onoloji. A slave also has a parent, a father, but it's just like the journey is too far. So all these proverbs are pointed to how Yoruba conceptualize slaves, how they perceive slaves, and how they treat slaves. They are subject of different material conditions. And this thing also points our attention to the fact that slavery in Yoruba land is different from slaves. The way Yoruba treats slaves as slaves is different from how slaves were being treated across the Atlantic. There is a dynamic to the status of slaves in Yoruba land. A slave can rise from ordinary slave to become an important man in society. And when I get to the aspect of folklore, I'm going to explain that according to what was written in the book of Samuel Johnson about the Omo Luwoni, in reference to Oni of Ife being a son of a slave. And I will be explaining that when I get to folklore. But all these proverbs are other ways to which we can see the way Yoruba conceptualize, perceive, and treat slaves over the historical period of time. So let me quickly go to the aspect of song, then we can now see. I also want to point it out that slaves were very important to Yoruba land. So they said that in some cognomen, in some orile, cognomen of some towns, you find that aspect of slaves. A vivid example of that is the Ijesha cognomen. And it says, Ijesha oridi Ishana, ile lomo eru owa ti muna roko. It shows that the slave was so important in Ijesha land that a space was crafted for it in the whole of Ijesha cognomen. That shows the importance, legacy, and the relevance of slaves to the economic, social, political development of Ijesha land. Omo eru owa is different from ordinary slaves in Ijesha land. They are as important as some set of ships in Ijesha land. So it shows the legacy and importance of all these slaves. And also, when we come to the aspect of, because in my own perspective, Orile, Owiki, they are also part of songs. And let's go to the modern song. And I'm going to be talking from the aspect of Yusuf Olatunji. Yusuf Olatunji's song, especially the volume 17 of Yusuf Olatunji's song, made mention of some concepts. Although he didn't treat slavery directly, but he made mention of some concepts like Eba Meki Salawa, Eku Aroti. Aroti is a word in Lagos Island. That means Aroti is an adaptation of Arota. And I'm going to explain what Arota means. And I'm going to explain what Ibiga means. Arota means someone who had lost his freedom, or someone who flee from war, who has no home to stay, has no place to stay. The only issue between Arota and ordinary slave is the fact that Arota was not captured. Arota flew and he was looking for a shelter. And the only thing is that Arota will stay with a particular family and they provide shelter. But the duty of Arota within a family is equal to the duty of a slave. This issue of Arota and Ibiga are still visible in Lagos Island. I'm going to talk about Ibiga and I will now summarize everything. Ibiga means a descendant of slaves. I have come across some documents at National Archives where some people say, I am an Ibiga. I am an Ibiga, a descendant of so person, the slave of Kosoko. Ibiga means someone born in a palace. Iga, so the people of Lagos Island means palace. Ibiga means someone born in the palace. Someone born in the palace is different from a prince born in the palace. And Ibiga means a descendant of a slave born in the palace. He doesn't enjoy equal rights with a prince in the palace. For example, I'm going to mention someone, Oshodi Takpa and Dada Antonio were not born in the palace, but they were slaves of, I can't remember the name of the father, but Dada Antonio and Oshodi Takpa grew up in the palace of Eleko with Kosoko. Oshodi Takpa was a slave, a Takpa slave. Dada Antonio was also a slave, but they grew up in the palace. It was because of that bond that King Kosoko decided to make Oshodi Takpa his second lieutenant, but because they grew up together. And then when we talk about the culture of Lagos, even up to now, it is the duty of an Ibiga to announce the passing away of a king. According to the culture of the people of Lagos, whenever an Oba dies, an Ibiga will announce the passing away of an Oba. Let's remember that an Ibiga is a descendant of slave. That's part of the legacy. It's a descendant of slave. We announce the passing of a king to the Eletu Odibo, who is the second in command. And the Eletu Odibo will now announce it to the general public. Shows the fact that even after abolition, even to the present period, that duty of a slave is still very much intact in the political structure, fabric and framework of Lagos. That is legacy and achievement of a slave. And then we get to understand the fact that we get to know about this, whether someone is a slave or a freeborn within a family. Whenever there's an issue of chieftaincy or there's an inheritance, it is when they are contesting for chieftaincy or inheritance that people say, no, we know who your father was. In spite of the fact that in the 19th century, legal abolition meant with moral abolition. And we don't hear anything about slavery again. But they still remind this people, which talks more about the identity of a slave, even in the contemporary period. No, your forefathers was a slave to my forefather. So you do not have rights to contest the position of chieftaincy or inheritance with us. That's the only period you get to know that, okay, these people, today you may want to intervene them and they will hide. In the colonial period and early 1960s, you can still see some people in Lagos Island that will tell you, I'm an Ibiga, I'm a descendant of slave. But in the present period, you will never see someone that will tell you I'm an Ibiga. They are always going from that identity. But through these concepts, through this idea, we can trace the study, we can trace people who are descendants of slaves. And let me go to the folklore. Like I said, my paper is a working paper. And I am open to more logical debates. We can debate this. We can always argue. We can offer different perspectives to it to improve the paper. And I will be talking about the folklores from different parts. I mentioned the perspective of Samuel Johnson in order to relegate the position for Foni among the children of Oduduwa and try to elevate the position of Alaafin as the supreme political head of the Yoruba land. I don't know. I've always argued the fact that I don't know when there was a meeting of the Yoruba Obas in Nigeria that they had to meet in Oyo, not in Ile-Ife, that Samuel Johnson decided to conclude that Ile-Ife is the spiritual headquarters of Yoruba and Oyo is the political headquarters. I don't know where he got the assertion from, but in that aspect, he was trying to relegate the position of Oni as not being the child of Oduduwa, and that's what I'm actually projecting as part of a folklore which can be mythical. In his story, he said Oni was a son of a slave that was captured to be sacrificed to one of the deities in Ile-Ife. But because the woman was pregnant, she was allowed to give birth. And then the mother was sacrificed, and the baby grew up with Oduduwa. At some point in time, the baby grew up to understand what's it called? The sacrifice for each of the gods, and later became king. It can be mythical. There's no logic, there's no scientific evidence to all these things. But this is a story that shows the fact that sometimes, even in Lagos Island, we have seen some slaves performing an important duties in religious courts. Because as a slave, they go to this court with their owners. They understand what computation is given to different gods. They understand all these things even more better than the freeborn. Shows the importance of these slaves. That's one aspect of it. And I'm also going to, my last aspect or other folklore before I conclude will be on masquerade. We have heard about the story of different masquerade in Yoruba land, especially in Ibadan land. I know for a fact that the Egungun Ololu in Ibadan are the very fearless and fearless Egungun in Ibadan. Ololu was a masquerade captured during the 19th century Yoruba Civil War. Was captured. The Egungun Ololu belonged to the Ekiti warriors. Was captured by the Ibadan warriors, and it was made, in my own idea, in my own conceptualization, Egungun Ololu, because it was captured, automatically becomes a slave. And there is a Yoruba proverb that says, there is a reputation in Ibadan land that a slave must necessarily carry the reputation to cleanse Ibadan of any evil. Over the years, Ibadan people use Egungun Ololu to carry that reputation. And because in that aspect, it was conceived that Egungun Ololu is a slave. Even up to last year, Egungun Ololu still carry the reputation. Shows the importance and the legacy of slaves, even in contemporary periods. And the last I'm going to talk about is a particular Egun in Imesile. Egungun, there were 4 masquerades that fought the 19th century Yoruba Civil War, especially the Kiriji War in Imesile. They include Gbado, Ladokun, Aladbuofe, and Ojiri. But the generally similar among this masquerade is Gbado Biogon. According to the folklore, the myth behind Gbado, it was said that there is a particular saying, there is a particular cognomen of Gbado that says Eru Ile Obe. And according to myths about the legend as regards that Egungun says, the masquerade was owned by a slave of the Obe family in Imesile. Until today, the Egungun still perform the duty of a warrior in every Egungun festival in Imesile. These are the perspectives I feel we consider. You can always look at the slave beyond the normal narrative, beyond what is in the books, beyond what the Europeans have actually handed over to us as a way in which we can look at slavery. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. And that was really inspiring. Bolu, I think we should go with the other presentation before questions. Okay. So thank you once again, Jacob. So the next presentation is by Ubede Joseph, and he'll be presenting on slavery, freedom, and exclusion in Igala land, a historical analysis. So, Ubede Joseph, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Ubede Joseph from the Department of History and International Studies, Kogi State University. I'll be presenting on the dynamics of slavery, freedom, and exclusion in Igala land, a historical analysis. So this paper was informed by the elements of inequality and discrimination in North Central Nigeria, especially in Igala land, based on some of the working research and paper that we've been working on for the past 3 years. The area we're looking at, Igala land, is located in central Nigeria in a transitory belt between the north and south. And by virtue of the River Niger and Benue, it has contacts with different people like the Benin, the Igbo, the Hausa, the Nupe, and other groups in Nigeria. Presently, the area shares boundary with about 10 states in Nigeria. As a result of this relation that span from the pre-colonial to colonial and post-colonial time, you can find cultures that were obtainable in Hausa land, Igbo land, Yoruba land, and elsewhere in Igala land. That explains why slavery have remained a major feature in Igala land till date. Now, the issue of slavery. Slavery in Igala land started before colonial rule because of the existence of domestic slavery. And the status of a slave differs from someone captured during war, someone sold, and the rest. But the form of slavery that took place in Igala land before colonial rule differs from that in Hausa land and elsewhere because there were no open sales of human beings. But because the area was used as a belt through which slaves were transferred from southern Nigeria to northern Nigeria and from northern Nigeria to some coastal cities in the Niger Delta area, slavery also emerged and people became middlemen in this area we're looking at. But with the abolition of slavery, it was believed that slavery was a foregone issue, but the reverse still remained the case in Igala land, and that necessitates this present study because there are many literature on slavery in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, in Igbo land, and in Yoruba land. But in Igala land, the materials are scarce, and it is believed that because they are scarce, that there are no longer issues of slavery and discrimination based on descent in Igala land. So that is why we're doing this study. Which method did we use? We used the historical method and oral sociology through contact tracing to see communities where this form of discriminations are still going on. And using Igala as a general scope, we narrowed it down to 3 communities, Ibaji, Ida, and Ayangba. Why these 3 communities? Ibaji still remain a communal city or town, a communal setting where transformation has not really taken place. It's still rural, people still depend on farming. And because there is no transformation from a village setting to a town, people still know who is a slave. And the right to land is still narrowed down to, are you a freeborn or are you a slave? But in Ayangba and Ida, where there have been elements of transformation from being a village to a town and urbanization is now setting in, the identity is disappearing. So we are trying to use these 3 different communities or towns to see how slavery is still determining who is free, who is not free, and who is a citizen in our study area. So in Ibaji, for instance, it is, like I said, it's a communal community that is based on farming, and elements of freedom abolitionism took place during the colonial period, where people like Peter Anago and other missionaries spearheaded the fight against slavery and abolitionism, set in with the intervention of education and the church and other Christian missionaries. But after independence, many persons were still being seen as slaves, are yet to be administered or admitted into community town halls where people decide, both men and women. And because they're being denied access to decision making, they don't have access to land. For them to have access to land, to farm, and have source of livelihood, they must go through the family of the SY owners who sublet lands to them. And because they don't have access to land and they have to go through the families of the SY owners, the SY owners still have dominant influence on them. When a freeborn is in the river fetching water or bathing, the descendants of slaves cannot go to such river to fetch water or bathe. This shows one attribute of the discrimination in Ibaji, because they don't participate in decision making, they don't come to town hall meeting, and they are not also seen as qualified to become kings or Ogbefi. Ogbefi is a title that once you harvest from your farm at the end of the year and you know you are wealthy, you've gotten good harvest, you can apply like, I want to become an Ogbefi. But certain persons often get denied from attaining or getting these titles because they are being adjudged as slaves. But in present Nigeria, there is nothing like slave. Everybody is seen as a citizen. But elsewhere, in North Central Nigeria, in Ibaji, some persons don't have the right to attend meetings. Some persons don't also have the right to get certain traditional titles, not because they don't have what it takes to finance it, but because they are being adjudged by the community as descendants of slaves. If we move forward to Ida, Ida is the headquarters of Igala land, and from time immemorial was known as a commercial center. Because of the trooping of the flow of people in and out of Ida, many persons from communities where slaves were still being discriminated against started moving to Ida in order for them to have a new identity, started trading. Certain persons like Amishi Aikoye in Ida took advantage of that by recruiting people who were descendants of slaves from villages as part of her commercial agents who she sent to other interiors to buy goods and other commercial wares for her. And through this, most of these persons got assimilated in Ida. Some of the household traders that came took some of them along with them as commercial agents. And with this commercial, is in the means of getting them involved in marketing and trading, most of their identity disappeared. This could also be said of Ayimba, where it was more or less like a highway connecting different parts of Igala land and Igbo land, where descendants of slaves moved into Ayimba. Even those that were brought into Ayimba as slaves later got assimilated into the society. Until date in Ayimba, you can't hear of this person is a slave until it is time for such persons to contest for the Ogoi or the Ono Ayimba, just like Jacob said. But when you go to Ibaji and other communal societies, you discover that when there's no contestation, people walk on the street. When it's time to marry, they'll tell you, don't go to this family, they are descendants of slaves. But when you move to Ayamba and Ida, it is not like that, because the community and society found a structure through which they can get assimilated and which is trade. So recently, 2 years ago, a wealthy man died in Ayamba, and when it was time for him to be buried, the first son was trying to decide that this is where I want to bury my father. And an old man admitted that you can't bury this man here. He has to be buried in my father's compound. And when the argument ensued, the children were cautioned that if you don't want people to hear your origin, you should oblige and your father to be buried. That was the family where he was brought into. And it was a tradition that each of their slaves to be buried in that compound. So the summary of the whole thing is that there is still elements of transitory slavery in North Central Nigeria and in Igala land, because it is believed that slavery is a foregone issue, but there are still certain persons somewhere who cannot exercise the right to land, right to association based on their descent, where in the same Igala society, people are enjoying relative freedom, but of the same stuff. So this shows that there is still element of transitory slavery, since people cannot marry, associate, and have access to land because their forebears are of slave descent. So this paper concludes that the form of freedom that exists in some parts of Igala land is transitory and relative, and slavery is yet to be buried in Igala land. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bede Joseph, for your very interesting presentation. I think by the time we conclude, we will really say quite a lot of things because we've been seeing some trends since yesterday. Thank you so much. So next on our list, and finally, is Mustafa. I'm reading your presentation. It's Monsuru Olaleka Muritala, and he'll be presenting to us today Muslim clerics and abolitionism in colonial Lagos, Mustafa Adamu and the history of a vanishing past. Thank you. Monsuru Olaleka Muritala, you have the floor.
Good morning, the chair.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, the chair, the attendees, and the co-panelists. The topic of my presentation today is Muslim clerics and abolitionism in colonial Lagos, Mustafa Adamu and history of a vanishing past. Yes, this paper actually looks at abolitionism from the prism of Islamic teachings' impact on Muslim clerics and the historical narrative of a slave master and his manumitted slave in colonial Lagos. What the paper is how to add to knowledge is the fact that, yes, there exists substantial scholarly works on the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade in Yoruba land. However, little attention has been paid to the personal efforts of local abolitionists, especially Muslim clerics in colonial Lagos. Yes, because the paper is looking at it from the prism of Islamic teachings, it will be important for us to have an idea of where the Muslim clerics involved actually derive the inspiration from, and from the particular aspect of the Islamic teachings. And this brings us to looking at what one of the verses of the Quran says. I take us to Quran chapter 4, verse 36. That is Surah Al-Nisa. And the Quran says, and do good to the parents and other relations, and orphans and the needy, and what your right hand possesses, that is slaves. For Allah loves not those who are proud and boastful. In this verse, Muslims are enjoined slaves and do good to them. In addition to that, Abu Zar, a companion of the Holy Prophet, ﷺ, really
Let's just give him a couple of minutes, but I'm sure he'll get back.
Sorry, I lost my distance for just a second. Okay. So, yes, the Muslims derive their teachings from the Quran and the Hadith. So, I've just quoted the verse of the Quran that relates to, the treatment of slaves. And then, I'm bringing us to that of the Hadith. And in that Hadith, in the book of Bukhari, Kitab al-Itqu, what it says is that your slaves are your brethren. So if any one of you happens to have a slave, let him give him the same food that he himself eats and the same clothing that he himself wears, and do not give them such work as is beyond their power to perform. And if ever happen to give them such work, you should help them in doing it. So for every Muslim, this is the way slaves are supposed to be treated. And that is where the likes of Sheikh Sumanu Ademashang and Idris Ademashang, two important Muslim clerics, are in colonial Lagos, in colonial and post-colonial Lagos. Sumanu existed during the colonial period, and he bequeathed the legacy on Idris Anima Shaun, who also lived beyond colonial period, up to the period of independence. And so we are looking at these Muslim clerics. But then let me quickly give a summary of the Muslim clerics in Lagos. Between the last quarter of the 19th century and the second half of the 20th century, the city of Lagos had Muslim clerics who were strong adherents of Islamic injunctions. Some of them were Sheikh Sumonu Anima Shaun, Idris Anima Shaun, Sakati Numbu, Jubril Martins, and Imam Mohammed Lawa Augusto. But for the purpose of our discussion, our concentration will be on two of the Muslim clerics, and these are Idris Anima Shaun and Sumonu Anima Shaun, especially Idris Anima Shaun, who manumitted Adamu Anima Shaun Mustafa, the focus of the paper. So who is Idris Anima Shaun? Idris Anima Shaun was formerly known as Akinola Ode, who was adopted by Sumonu Anima Shaun, who integrated him into the Anima Shaun family of Lagos. Sheikh Asuma Anima Shaun was the one who integrated Idris Anima Shaun into the Anima Shaun family of Lagos. And in the course of my fieldwork, one of the Anima Shauns told me in another interview that Sumonu Anima Shaun was so concerned about slaves in the 19th century Lagos that he was buying slaves purposely to free them, to liberate them. It was indeed an abolitionist. Well, I've been trying to get documents to back this up, but then let me continue with the story. The story of life and times of Idris cannot be examined in isolation from the kindness extended to him and bequeathed on him by Sumonu Asuma Anima Shaun. So because Sumonu was very kind to slaves, so when he adopted Idris was not a slave. He adopted him, really, but and then he extended that kindness to Idris. Now, the important thing there is that Idris now extended the same kind gesture to his own slaves that he bought for himself, Adamu Mustafa Anima Shaun, and that is the focus of this conversation. So we now talk about Idris now. Idris Anima Shaun was a model example of a devout but highly tolerant Muslim leader of the 19th century and early 28th. Sorry, I just missed something. Wow. An early 20th century, yes. It was an early 20th century Lagos. The story of his life in Lagos is traceable to Sheikh Sumonu.
It's gone for some time now. We'll still hold on for a little while.
I'm so sorry. I lost my network.
It's okay.
Okay. So please let me make it very fast. Yes. Now we are focusing on Idris Anima Shaun, of course, who was an adopted son of Sheikh Sumonu Anima Shaun. So let's look at the small, biography of Idris. Yes, Idris was given education in Lagos, and Idris' penchant for education and his level of literacy were by no means small, as he was able to work as a clerk and interpreter in the Aborigines Department of the Colonial Government Administration. Similarly, Idris Anima Shaun founded the first government Muslim school in Lagos. He was educated by Sumonu Anima Shaun. The important virtue bequeathed on Idris Anima Shaun by Sheikh Sumonu was the good treatment of slaves. Sheikh Sumonu was an exemplary abolitionist, and I've said it, who was reported to have been buying slaves purposely to set them free in line with the Islamic injunction that encourages Muslims to be kind and generous to slaves. So Idris Anima Shaun demonstrated this act of kindness to Mustafa Adamu, who was later known as Adamu Animashaun, when he granted him freedom in 1912. He granted him freedom from the lowly position of a slave and became integrated into the Animashaun family of Lagos. And how did he do this? Mustafa Adamu Animashaun, hereafter simply referred to as Adamu Animashaun, that is the slave, was born a free man in Kano, Nigeria, in the last quarter of the 19th century, to a certain Usman, who married the daughter of the chief imam of Kano, Ibrahim. Adamu lost his freedom when he was captured in the Basasa War between 1893 and 1895 at the young age of 8. Adamu had a history of being sold from one master to the other, from Zaria to Katsina, from Katsina to Cairo in Egypt, from Egypt to Zaria, back to Sokoto, from Sokoto to Ilorin, and then back to Lagos. Now, the most fascinating thing is that one of the greatest developments in Adamu's life was his being sold to Idris Animashaun in Lagos. Meaning, from all these places he had been sold to, it was in Lagos that he found succor and that he was treated as a human being. And so, who is this Idris, Adamu that we are talking about? Adamu had the privilege of attending a government Muslim school, a slave that was sent to school, which was headed by his master, Idris Animashaun, where he acquired remarkable ability to read, write, and speak the English language. That's Adamu. So, in 1902, he was employed by his master as an assistant shopkeeper. He was committed to his master's business and rendered excellent service with utmost trust. By 1904, he was entrusted with the full management of his master's business with goods worth over 2,000 pounds. You can imagine 2,000 pounds in colonial Lagos then. So Adamu continued in his position as the manager of his master's business until 1912, when his master, Idris Animashaun, resigned as headmaster of government Muslim school in 1912, with a view to devoting his time and energy to his private business. So Idris integrated Adamu fully into the Animashaun family of Lagos, set him up in business, and granted him certificate of freedom in 1912. So Idris was an abolitionist. He granted freedom to the slaves that he bought with his own money that was to serve him. So he granted him freedom, he trained him, and this slave later rose to become a prominent person in Lagos. So Adamu opened a shop. Adamu opened a shop in 1913 at Chita Street in Lagos, selling Islamic books and materials. In spite of his servile background, Adamu got married to the daughters of highly placed personalities in Lagos, such as the chief imam of Lagos, Chief Ashobon, that is the white cap chief, Alpha Idris Animashaun. Thus, he became exposed to both the traditional and Muslim elite in Lagos. And you see, these two classes of people were the movers and shakers in colonial Lagos at that period. So Adamu married to a white cap chief, to the daughter of a white cap chief, and he also married to the daughter of a Muslim cleric. So, we can now be talking about his impact. Who the Adamu Animashaun eventually had impact as a publisher, editor, and politicians in Lagos. We are talking of a slave that was granted freedom, and he later became a known publisher, an editor, and a politician in Lagos. As early as 1914, Adamu Animashaun established a Muslim printing office where he printed items such as large posters, notices, handbills, and circulars. From the printing office, Adamu Animashaun published what he called Nigeria Almanac. In the Almanac, he described himself as an astrologer who could tell the future of interested clients. And of course, that attracted people to him in Lagos. Okay? And, we believe that he will solve their spiritual problem. While Adamu Animashaun was actively involved in publishing his Nigeria Almanac, he was also deeply involved in the politics of the Lagos Central Mosque, where internal crises had divided the congregation into two groups. He became enmeshed in this crisis, using his publishing firm to support a faction. So this is a slave that was doing something meaningful, that was impacting on the society after he got freedom. Now, Adamu, the role played by Adamu Animashaun during the Muslim crisis clearly made him a central character in the religio-political development of Lagos. The adverse publicity that some Lagos newspapers gave the crisis must have influenced Adamu Animashaun to urge Lagos Muslims to invest in newspapers publishing. Yes, this Adamu, as a publisher, became concerned. Of course, he became concerned in the Muslim crisis in Lagos, and he discovered that the newspapers at that period who, of course, were not apologetic to the Muslim cause, were given bad reports, and he felt that the Muslims should hold a newspaper. He subsequently bought the Times of Nigeria, one of the prominent newspapers of that period, for £360 from J.B. Davis in 1918. And as the General Secretary of the Muslim Community of the Lagos Central Mosque, the ownership of the Times of Nigeria by Adamu Animashaun was also very useful to him and his supporters because it afforded them the opportunity to give reply to their critics who use other newspapers, especially the Nigerian Pioneer, to publish negative reports and articles about them. Evidently, because of the success of the paper in the first 2 years of managing and editing it, Adamu Animashaun requested the executive committee of the Muslim community to take over the responsibility of the Times of Nigeria while it will still remain his editorial positions. So, he eventually facilitated the buying of that newspaper. Now, let us now look at Adamu Animashaun in Lagos politics. We are still talking about the liberated slave, that slave that benefited from the kindness of his master, who also derived that inspiration from Islamic teachings. So, politics was another important preoccupation of Adamu Animashaun. In his old age, his involvement in politics later in life was in connection with his vision that Muslims must be active in the affairs of Lagos. Thus, when the United Muslim Party was formed in 1953, with the sole aim of improving the position of Muslims in the society, he was made the patron of the party. Adamu Animashaun wrote many letters and petitions to the colonial administration with regard to the education, employment, and provision of facilities for Muslims in Lagos and its environs. For Muslims in Lagos and its environs, although he never contested any election, he was reported to have addressed many of the rallies organized by the party in his effort to capture seats in the election into the Lagos City Council. Adamu Animashaun remained the patron of the party until 1966, when it was banned with all other political parties in the country by the military. I mean, this is quite fascinating that someone from a lowly position of a slave could have risen to that prominent position in colonial Lagos by virtue of being liberated by his master, who actually derived that inspiration to treat slaves very well from Islamic teaching. So this paper concludes by saying that the paper has examined the roles of Muslim clerics in the transformation of a liberated slave from lowly position to a prominent personality in colonial Lagos. From a position of servility, Adamu Animashaun rose to be a leader of importance in the Lagos Muslim community through determination, dedication, and a clear perception of the kind of Muslim community he would like to see emerge. The paper indeed argues that abolition of trade in slaves was not synonymous with Europeans alone, but also with Africans, especially Muslim clerics, whose abolitionism efforts have been under-celebrated. Thank you for listening.
I really have to clap. All our presenters have really presented very interesting papers. So with this, I will like to open the floor for questions and answers, which afterwards, my colleague and I will also ask our own questions. So yeah, I see a hand raised up. So yes.
Good morning, everybody. My question goes to the first speaker, and I also have another one for the second speaker. So you were talking about how the relevance of proverbs, folklores, and songs made an impact to slavery. So by the Yorubas during the pre-colonial period, I mean? Yeah. But my question is, did they do all those things to pacify the slaves, or they just do it so that they can use, so that when the slaves were hearing all those things, they'll be able to ginger them to do more, to work, or to be using them? Because I don't really understand. So I want to know more about it. What are those three aspects for song, folklore, and the rest? So you can explain more better. Then the second question, you Mr. Joseph talked about hammered on Ibaji, Ida, and Animba as a case study of his research pertaining to the issue of slavery in Negala land. So I want to ask, the remaining towns the remaining towns, do they also have the same ideology about what those three towns had a view on? And again, you made the point that slaves, there is freeborn, there are freeborn and slaves are being discriminated among the Igala people. So assuming now, if a wealthy man from an Igala man that is a slave came to the town to do something, or probably wants to establish a company or make to beautify the town, will they say no, that he should not do it because he's a slave? Or it's another way around? Please, I want to have a more understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Jacob, I think you can go first.
Let me answer the question.
I have another question.
Okay, should I? Or there's another question?
Yes.
Okay, another question.
My question goes to the last presenter. I'm curious to know if there is any case, slave, as at that time, were able to get to a point of buying their freedom. And if that is the case, what can you say contributed, or in what condition do you think this is made possible? So because we really want to know, just to put it side by side with the abolitionist movement as credited to the Muslim. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. My question goes to the first presenters, the first presenter. Now, ipso facto, are you trying to discuss the relevance within slavery discourse, or perhaps you're trying to use this, or perhaps you're trying to perspectivize the discourse to counter the erroneous impression of the Europeans? Yes. So what nexus does it have within the slavery discourse? Or perhaps probably you should try to remodify that discourse by discussing the relevance of proverbs, songs, and folklores in slavery. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Can I respond?
No, yeah, you can respond.
Yeah, I think the question pointed to me by the first person and the second person seems similar. Like we understand the fact that proverbs are just a description of an art or event. So I am not using the three aspects of my paper presentation, proverbs, songs, and folklore, to explain the relevance. I'm only offering another perspective to our understanding of slave discourse. Like I said earlier, that many of what we know about slavery, apart from what we were told from oral history, and what was written in text, either by the Europeans or by the African scholars. Well, how far can we go? What are the other sources available to us in understanding slavery? And I've pointed out to three other ways in which we can get our sources. For example, every proverbs I made mention of when I was presenting my paper were description of an event. I remember I said something about the fact that slavery in Yoruba land are subject of different material conditions. It is just describing how Yoruba perceive, conceptualize, and the roles the Yoruba play in abolitionism. Everything, all these three aspects is embedded in proverbs. For example, I talk about something about if you want to warn someone, or you want to talk about a warning to slave, you can say, you are telling them, you are warning slaves. If you want to explain the fact that you are compassionate about the slave, Yoruba people will say, òfin tá bá torí ẹrú ṣe, a kì í torí ọmọ ká parẹ́. shows the fact that at some point in time in the history of the Yoruba people, they regard slave as to be equal with freeborn. Same thing as the way that that if you tell a slave that you are a slave, you don't expect that slave to be happy. They are subject of how Yoruba perceive. They are subject of different material conditions and different regions in Yoruba land. Different conditions. It is not similar. So that is the dynamic of the state of slave at different material and historical conditions in Yoruba land. And when you talk about abolition, like what Dr. Murtala Mosu just explained about abolition, there are proverbs that speak to Yoruba conceptualization of abolition. Yeah, we have gotten to a stage whereby we have to debunk the erroneous perception of the Europeans that they brought abolition to us. No, if there were not people who were grumbling underground, abolition would have been successful. And one example of that is the proverb that says, "Eruni Baba Onoloji." Is a perspective to say Yoruba at some point in time were considering the fact that slaves are also human beings. Don't treat them like an outcast. Do you understand? That is the role of proverb in explaining the different roles, the different positions, different ideas of the Yoruba to slaves at different material and historical conditions. And that is what I was trying to use at these three concepts to explain. To explain is offering another methodological approach or perspective to how we can study slavery beyond reading textbook or beyond going to a one man. We expect that, okay, we want to know about what happened, because abolition in Nigeria, we understand that the British abolition was in 1807, but it took another 26 years, 1833, but before slavery was totally abolished. You can't find a man that was born in 1833 to date. That's close to 200 years ago. You cannot meet them for our interview about how was slavery in their time. So we get to know about this. All this information comes to us through some available documents. And our available documents in African society, because we do not have the writing techniques, we use orality. And part of the orality we have to consider are also proverbs. It's not all about interview alone. Proverbs, folklores, yeah, you can say folklores are mythical. You can say they are legends, story of legends, but some of them have iota of truth. It depends on the historian critically looking into this issue. So we have to consider this in studying slavery, and it will give us another perspective to how we can study slavery. I think I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Joseph, you are next to answer the question.
Okay, thank you. Let me acknowledge that this research is an aspect of the AFRAB research project that we'll be doing in North Central Nigeria. And we've been doing them from society, from community to community. And it's focused on the role of Africans and Nigerians in abolishing slavery. So in each aspect, we try to present it before scholars and like minds to see intervention. So we've treated other parts of Igala land, but the first question is, what happened in other towns in Igala land? You see, when I started, I said, most of the events that took place in Igala land, both commerce, politics, and its social relations were predicated or determined by the River Niger and River Benue, which necessitated contact with other people and regions. In Ibaji, for instance, it is very close to the Igbo and the Delta society and the Benin. And as a result of that, you will find an extract of the Igbo culture, the Benin culture, and the Igala culture there. But when you move to other parts of Igala land, in the eastern part of Igala land, you also discover that most of the culture that were obtainable or are obtainable in this part of Igala land has to do with a semblance of the Hausa, the Idoma, the Tiv culture. This is also as a result of the relationship that these areas have had and built over the years. But in Ibaji, they've been able to hold on to this discrimination of people as slaves It could be as a result of their close relationship or interaction with the Igbo, where the caste system exists. But if you look at Egume and Ankpa, for instance, there are also two other communities in Igala land. In Egume, for instance, slaves, the ex-slaves were given to people to marry and assimilated into the society and given land to farm. And now you can't discriminate who is a descendant of a slave in Egume. Go to Ankpa, for instance, where the Hausa had a major influence on the Igala. You discover that you can't trace who is a slave because most of the Hausa that moved to Ankpa with the colonial administrators were merchants and who got assimilated into the society. And as a result of that, a new culture evolved. When you get to Ankpa, you find most of them are now Islamic clerics. So you can't say this is a slave. So what I explained about Ibaji cannot easily be traced to other communities in Igala land. That is that, and I explained that it is not as their unique culture and relationship with the Igbo. Talking about the freeborn slaves and what happened if a wealthy descendant of ex-slave comes to the society that wants to intervene in development. I will give you two examples. There was a time that Mary, I've forgotten the surname, came and she wanted to tap electricity from Ida to the interior in Ibaji to Onale, to be precise. The community rejected that. They can't watch a slave to bring light to them. That the slave will start having a say that, yes, if not for us, they are claiming freeborn. They couldn't give themselves life. We won't accept that. A descendant of an ex-slave also made an intervention, wanted to construct road in the same Onale. They rejected. So what later happened? Most of the descendants of the ex-slave who are wealthy are not choosing Ida as their ancestral home. They choose to build their houses in Ida, do their weddings and everything in Ida. They hardly take any function to the village. So it is as strong as that, that once you are coming to do anything, even politically, they reject it in some parts of Ibadan, especially the Afiamelele, Enweli, Onale, Aike, and Odeke. And when you talk about the Igala, it's not, you can't find just one culture in Igala land. Because if you look at the evolution of Igala land, it's an area that metamorphosed from chiefdom to kingdom. And those transitions happened because of the contact it had with both the Igbo, the Hausa. Even the early Igalamela, what they call Igalamela, were of different groups, 9 different groups of people coming together to form that chiefdom. That's what they call them, the 9 leading Igala. So you can't find just one culture there. So it also applies to this issue of slavery and how slaves are treated. But we choose to narrow our study down to Anyiga, Ida, and Iba, give it a comparative outlook for us to be able to measure and say, this is what is happening here, this is what is happening here, and these are the trend. So that's why I choose Ida, Anyagba, and Ibaji. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you. Yes, the next is Monsuru to answer the question that was posed to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. For the question, I think the question is on manumission. And if we understand manumission in the study of slavery very well, manumission could come in different forms. You know, it could be as a result of the slave, probably buying his or her own freedom. And it could also be through servitude. So in the case of the Muslims this time around, the Muslims in Lagos, the records we have, apart from the fact that the inspiration to treat slaves very well, they actually derived that from the teachings of their religion. The Muslims at that period did not sell freedom, but granted freedom. In fact, the uniqueness of the relationship between Idris Animashaun and Mustafa Adam Animashaun, Idris was the slave master and Mustafa was the slave that was liberated. It was Mustafa Adam. Then when he became integrated into the Animashaun family, it became Mustafa Adam Animashaun. The uniqueness of their relationship is the fact that, he was integrated into the Animashaun family by Idris, and he handled Idris' business for a very long time which he did conscientiously and diligently with utmost honesty. And then, of course, Idris found him worthy of being granted freedom in line with the teachings of the Quran. So he granted him freedom. He was liberated. So the Muslims of the period, and if we go into the distant past, like I said from my experience in the field, if we go into the distant past, Sheikh Sumanu Animashan, who himself adopted Idris and trained him, and who was also said to have been buying slaves purposely to set them free. So that is a pointer to the fact that the Muslim clerics of that period, they at no point sold, freedom. Yeah. They granted their slaves freedom. They did not collect money or any material things, except that, of course, the slaves to be granted freedom must have served them for quite some time, just like in the case of Idris Animashaun. But in the case of Sheikh Sumano Animashaun, who was said to have been buying slaves, of course, I'm still looking for existing documents. What I have found so far is the fact that Sumano Animashaun was among the prominent merchants in Lagos of that period. That, he made so much wealth also from the sale of property, and he was among the few African merchants that were highly revered also in colonial Lagos. But of course, what I was told by the extended Animashaun family, a descendant of the Animashaun family, about him, that he concerned himself with buying of slaves purposely to set them free and not to work for him. I have not gotten any document to back that up. So I will conclude by saying that for the person that asked the question, the summary of the whole thing is that the Muslim of that period, they did not sell freedom by anything from their slaves, and especially in the case of between Idris and Adamu. Adamu was granted freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And if I understand, I was told that some people have questions online. I don't know. We cannot see it from here, so I don't know who is in charge there. If you can read those questions.
Mr. Uzomaka Mwachuku, can you go ahead and ask your question, please?
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to correct something. I'm not a mister, I'm a miss. Then I also want to commend all the presenters. This was beautifully done. I've learned a lot from all of this. I want to also acknowledge the fact that most of the papers presentation speaks about the existence of caste practice in Lagos, in Ijesha, and all of that, because even freeborn, the status of freeborn and ex-slave all falls within the category of castes. All right. But what I found really interesting in this presentation is Ineke's paper, Dr. Ineke. I want to ask specifically about the historical changes that have occurred in Igala land in those three spaces that you interrogated. Okay. I know for a fact, as someone interested in caste practice in Eastern Nigeria, that change does not come at once, irrespective of the geographical and occupational structure in those places. All right. So what I want to ask is, other agencies or other factors that contributed to the change in caste operation in urban places and then in the communal space you spoke about. Did we have things like the ex-slave communities petitioning, advocating, or doing things like that brought about this change in their dynamic? And even though you say that the geography played an important role, which I agree, I do know that caste practices exist even in Kano and Kaduna, which are like the outer part of northern Nigeria. So if those caste practice exist in Kaduna and Co, even up to date, why is it that in a Igala urban area that has close proximities to those spaces, caste practice to a large extent is non-existent based on your presentation of paper? So I would want to ask about the agency of ex-slave communities in your space. Then Jacob, I would want to ask that if possible, you explore folk tales, proverbs, and songs associated with abolition. Okay, and then if there are tensions also associated with that, like ex-slave communities not being happy with the status that those folklores have placed them in, that category the folklores have placed them in. If you know, but if not, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zomaka, for your question. Joseph, would you like to go first?
Yes, let me. Okay, thank you very much, Uzomaka. There've been some changes and interventions from social groups and from persons who felt that this trajectory should just stop. I will start from the Ibadan Development Association. In 1993, the association made a claim that they don't want to be associated with anything like discriminating against human beings based on their descent. And their disapproval of the trajectory or discrimination came from the rejection of people that are of ex-slave descent in the town, refusing to join the association because they felt that if they joined the association in the town, they will also get discriminated against and referred to as slave where they are staying. So because of that, the Ibadan Development Association wrote to the different kings in Ibadan, demanding that the discrimination against people of slave descent should stop. And as a result of that, there were interventions from the communities themselves. The Afiambele I mentioned earlier, comprised of Aeke, Odeke, Enweli, and Unale, the various kings came together and proclaimed that going forward, nobody should be referred to as a slave anymore. And a special ceremony was done in these places by the various kings, where the various people that were of slave descent were assembled in the village shrine and cleansed. But the community itself rejected those interventions because the kings were challenged that if actually you are sincere to this proclamation, give out your daughter to a son of a slave descent to marry, or allow your male son, who is the heir apparent to the throne, to marry a female from the family of a slave descent. That once this is done, they will believe that yes, there is no more discrimination. Until date, that is yet to be done. And by assembling people that were of slave descent to the village shrine, even those that were not hitherto known as being from the slave descent were exposed. So that intervention to date is yet to yield any fruit. So there are also people like Gabriel Odoku, who took it upon himself in a eulogy to challenge the status quo that no, I like a lady and I want to marry this lady. The family challenged him, the community challenged him that for you to marry this lady, you must perform certain rites. He refused to mention those rites to me when I interviewed him. But he went ahead to perform those traditional rites that were needed for cleansing the lady and got married to the lady. Despite the challenges, about 2 other persons, they've done that in the last 30 years. We have Isaac Amana, who died recently, a reverend pastor, who is from Unale, where the discrimination is very thick and tight in Ibaji, who took over 10 persons from his village, registered them in artistry, all this handwork stuff. Some trained himself as a carpenter, and now they are doing well in Ayangba, Lokoja, and other places. But it was more of a taboo in his village to bring such persons under your roof. But he took them from his village, got them into the town, trained them, and now they are doing well. So there will be intervention in the area of associations and individuals too. There's also one William Oyibo who took the community to court for denying him access to land, for denying him access to the throne, whereas he has been seeing he saw himself as one of the heir apparents to the throne. But when the contestation for the chieftaincy title came, he was denied based on the claim that he is of slave descent. He took them to court. and his name is William Oyibo. So there have been interventions, but these interventions are yet to yield substantial dividend. And the case you raised in the Hausa communities, yes, it could be true, but if you look at, I said the situation in Ibaji could, I'm not yet certain, this is a work in progress, but if you check the relationship that Ibaji has with most of the Igbo communities, and where these discriminations are very predominant, they are the communities that has a common boundary, direct boundary with the Igbo communities. And these communities where they share common boundary with also have this caste system. And when you get to these communities also in Ibaji, you discover they also bear Igbo names. They have Igala names, they have Igbo names. They speak Igbo, they speak Igala. So, and when we start doing historical research, we look out for every possible evidence that we can lay our hands on. Other communities in Igala land who don't discriminate, or where the discrimination is as predominant as in Ibaji, yes, these communities have evolved beyond communal communities. The Hausa communities they've also evolved beyond these communal societies. But it's not also in all Hausa lands that you find this discrimination. So this is an opening that we'll also explore going further. But when you get to Ankpa, where they have strong Hausa influence and Hausa culture, there is no discrimination of this person is from a slave descent. And some Igala will argue that Ankpa is not an Igala society, Ankpa is a Hausa society because of the strong influence of the Hausa in that part of the Igala society. So that is the most I could say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your detailed explanation. Jacob, you have a question pending for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bishop question is that not a question, just an area for me to explore. Yeah, I would say I have not really thought about incorporating something into my story, but then it's the next suggestion. I will look at it, then I will try. And like I said, it's the working paper. I will try to incorporate that into my working. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if we have more questions online, in presence, and
you can go to the question segment from your end. I'm going to make you a host now.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, from some attendees, okay, I think the first one is just a comment, but I'll read it so that we can all hear. Nice explanation by Joseph. The situation is similar in Igbo land, where abolition is ceremonial, but the people often ask the abolitionist chiefs to offer their children for marriage first. Another one, Joseph's explanation is a carbon copy of Igbo society. I think he should consider a comparative study with core Igbo land. So that's a suggestion for you. Another one, nice presentation from Jacob, also the first presenter. He should read Proverbs by A.B. Ellis, 1894, and Olatunji Ojo's work, Silent Testimonies, Public Memory Slavery in Yoruba Proverbs. So those are suggestions, and thank you so much for these comments. If you have any more questions, please, you can drop it in the chat so that we'll read it. But meanwhile, I would like to hand over to my colleague to also ask questions, inputs, comments, and so on. Okay, Bolu?
Yes. Thank you, Mary, for anchoring the session. And also thank you, everyone, our speakers. This has exceeded our expectation. I think I speak for Mary and I. I do have a few, I guess, comments and questions. The first is for Jacob, because I'm personally interested, and I think it's a very fruitful area to explore, the area of material culture and the ritual archives, because you talked briefly about masquerades and the masquerade cultures, the masquerade practices. I think you talked about Yololu. You also talked about this in Imesi, right? And I'm wondering how much further you could explore this ritual archive, because it does seem they don't fall under the category of proverbs or songs or folklore, right? This is a separate practice. But I think that that carries equal weight, maybe even more, because practices of performance, right, like you've said, reenact historical occurrences, right? If you talk about Ololu being a masquerade that was captured from a population that Ibadan used to dominate, right? It's a symbol of their enslavement, of their domination of this other culture. And even till now, every year it has to perform these ritual practices that sort of reinstate the past, these past activities of slavery, of conquering, of warring, right? Ibadan is famous for its warlords, and these people would fight in the 19th century, reenact this in the present, right? This is very much a concrete legacy of, and a concrete continuity of 19th century social relations in the present. So I don't know how much you've thought about this, but I think it would be very, very fruitful to explore this angle. Secondly, and this goes to both you and Joseph, because I think your presentations have so many similarities, even though your focus is on folklore and oral culture. You did talk about the Ibiga, right? These elite slaves, this continuation of slavery or of the memory of slavery within elite families, within communities, which goes hand in hand with your own thesis, right, Joseph, the continuities of slave-like relations among the Igala people. And this brings to mind this, the famous text on slavery, Myers and Kopitov, you've definitely read it, which put forth this assimilationist idea of African slavery, that slavery was different in many African societies because enslaved people could be incorporated into society, right? As generations passed, these people could then acquire a measure of kinship, or affective kinship is the word, is the term they use, and become part of the community. But your thesis seemed to contradict this very popular view of slavery in African societies, that in fact, these people were either not assimilated at all or assimilated incompletely, right? They still are differentiated within those communities today. So I wonder if you've engaged with this literature on assimilation, on the incorporation of enslaved people into society, which I think overall makes the argument that slavery in African societies was perhaps more benign, right? Less harsh and less, harmful than slavery in American societies, right? Have you engaged with this scholarship, and what would you say about it, from what you've observed in your field research?
Okay, and thank you. There are literatures that portray the picture that the form of slavery that took place in Africa were not as harsh as the slavery we read about in literature, where slaves were maltreated and the rest. Yes, I quite agree with them. But when it comes to the assimilation, if you say slave or slave descendants were assimilated into the society in Africa, that would be too general. I will give you an instance in the northern part of the country, the far north, in Suleja Emirate, for instance. It took Emir Suleiman around 1921 to put a stop to slavery. And what he did to get them assimilated and not to be discriminated against was to open a farm for them, where most of the descendants of the slaves were moved into. And they now had their own emir. But because they were living in a separate land, a separate farm, those in the Suleja Emirates still had major influence on them. They were never considered to be the emir of Suleja, but the emir of their own Dunga. They were not allowed to enter Suleja until they are permitted by the emir of Suleja. That is, before entering Suleja, they have to send information that we want to come to Suleja and do this and do that. Yes, it could be a form of assimilation, but a relative assimilation. Now, those in Suleja are no longer seeing them that these are slaves. But it also means that once you stay in that farm camp and get yourself developed and leave the farm camp, nobody knows your identity anymore. But the fact that they were segregated from the main society is another form of discrimination. Why don't you leave them to stay in Suleja and you stop discriminating against them? That is one. The same picture in Igala land. In Egume, they were fully assimilated. What happened in Egume was similar to the scenario presented by Dr. Moritala, where a slave owner would give out his daughter to his loyal slave to marry, with the hope that the loyal slave will take over his farm holding and continue a family legacy. Through that, the identity of slavery in Egume is relatively buried. It is not the same with Ida and Ayeba that are now commercial cities. So, and that is why my presentation, I said Igala land, but I narrowed it down to 3 places in order to bring out the specifics. Yes, it is good to say, yes, they got assimilated in Africa. It is relative. But when you now move into Africa and start moving to certain communities, you see forms of discriminations that portray the fact that these people are not assimilated. They could get acculturated but not assimilated. That is what I can say about that.
What did you have another question to Jacob, or it was just a suggestion?
The suggestion, I did want him to comment on this idea of assimilation too, because it seems evident in some of the things you talk about in local communities, the fact that people still remember and remark on people's slave ancestry, right? There's this politics of difference that seems to be at play, but I mean, obviously you don't have to do that. The other thing I was thinking about was this.
Bolu, sorry to interrupt you. I think Joseph wants to remember something.
Yeah, I want to chip in something. Like in this same Igala area that is our study area, the Ashadu, the head of the kingmaker, is believed to be of a slave descent. But over the years, he was assimilated by the first female king in Igala land, Ebolejono, who adopted him and later got married to him. And later he became the head of the kingmaker. So there are selected cases. But these persons, now when they talk about their family, the family of the Ashadu, they don't refer to them as slave again, but Ashadu, slave in Igala land is Adu, and their title is Ashadu. But they now call the Ashadu with pride now, like the Ibiga in colonial Nigeria. This group of slaves have been assimilated because they have a touch with royalty. Those that are yet to have a touch with royalty, like people are saying, give your daughter out or let your son marry someone from there, they are yet to be assimilated. So when someone pick the case of the Ashadu, for instance, you say, slaves have been assimilated. But what happened to those who don't have that royal touch or royal blessings? Thank you.
Olu, I think you can go ahead. How much time do you think we have left?
Yeah. No time.
Okay. So I think maybe in 5 minutes we'll just conclude.
No, I mean, I think we can definitely also keep the conversation going by email later because I'm very, we both work in this field and we're very interested in the discourse on slavery and abolition in contemporary Nigeria. So we very much want to keep this relationship with all our speakers alive and perhaps collaborate further in the future. So I'll stop there so that I don't take up any more time. And thank you again for submitting your abstracts and answering our call when we put it out. So thank you.
Thank you.
So just to add to that, we will communicate directly through email because I have some things to say too, but since we have no time, and we really, really sincerely thank you for answering this call and we wish you the best. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.